The Book of Esther is a powerful narrative of courage, faith, and divine providence. Set in the Persian Empire during the reign of King Ahasuerus, Xerxes I, it tells the story of a Jewish woman who rises to a position of influence and with the help of her cousin Mordecai, saves her people from annihilation. The banquet and the queen's disobedience. In the Persian capital of Susa, King Ahasuerus ruled over an empire that stretched from India to Ethiopia. One day he hosted a lavish banquet, a display of his wealth and power that lasted 180 days. At the end of the feast, the king, in a moment of drunkenness, summoned his beautiful queen, Vashti, to display her beauty before the drunken nobles. However, Vashti refused the king's command, inciting his anger. Furious and humiliated, Ahasuerus sought counsel from his advisors. They warned that Vashti's defiance could encourage women across the empire to disobey their husbands. A decree was issued, and Vashti was removed from her position as queen. Ahasuerus ordered a search for a new queen to replace her. Esther's rise. In Susa lived a Jewish man named Mordecai, a descendant of the exiled Jews who had been brought to Babylon. Mordecai had a younger cousin, Esther, also known as Hadassah, whom he had adopted as his own daughter after her parents' death. Esther was beautiful, kind, and wise, and when the king's decree went out, she was taken to the palace along with many other young women to undergo beauty treatments in the hopes of being chosen as the new queen. For a year, Esther was treated with perfumes and oils, preparing for her audience with the king. Mordecai had warned her not to reveal her Jewish heritage, and so she kept this secret. When Esther finally appeared before King Ahasuerus, he was immediately captivated by her beauty and grace. Out of all the women presented to him, Esther found favor in his eyes, and he placed the royal crown on her head, making her queen. The plot against the king. Mordecai often sat by the palace gates to keep watch over Esther. One day, while he was there, he overheard two of the king's eunuchs plotting to assassinate Ahasuerus. Mordecai informed Esther, who in turn reported it to the king in Mordecai's name. The plot was foiled, and the two conspirators were executed. The event was recorded in the king's chronicles, but Mordecai's role in saving the king went unrecognized at the time. The rise of Haman. Soon after, a man named Haman was elevated to the position of prime minister. Haman was a descendant of Agag, the king of the Amalekites, an ancient enemy of the Jewish people. He was a proud and arrogant man, and the king had commanded all the officials at the royal gates to bow down and show respect to Haman. Mordecai, however, refused to bow, for as a Jew, he would not bow to anyone but God. This defiance infuriated Haman. Upon discovering that Mordecai was Jewish, Haman devised a plan to not only punish Mordecai but to annihilate all the Jews in the empire. Haman approached King Ahasuerus with a proposal, portraying the Jews as a rebellious and dangerous people scattered throughout the empire. He offered to pay a large sum of money into the royal treasury if the king would issue a decree to destroy them. Without much thought, Ahasuerus agreed, giving Haman his royal signet ring to seal the decree. The decree was sent throughout the empire, announcing that on the 13th day of the month of Adar, all Jews, men, women, and children, were to be killed, and their property plundered. Mordecai's plea to Esther. When Mordecai learned of the decree, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly. All across the empire, Jews fasted, wept, and mourned. Hearing of Mordecai's distress, Esther sent one of the king's eunuchs to find out what was troubling him. Mordecai explained the situation and urged Esther to go to the king and plead for her people's lives. Esther, however, was hesitant. There was a strict law that no one, not even the queen, could approach the king uninvited. Doing so could result in death unless the king extended his golden scepter in mercy. Mordecai's response to Esther was resolute. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" Moved by Mordecai's words, Esther made her decision. She asked Mordecai to gather all the Jews in Susa to fast and pray for her for 3 days. "When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." Esther's courage. On the 3rd day, Esther dressed in her royal robes and approached the king in his inner court. Seeing her, the king was pleased and extended his golden scepter. Esther touched the tip of the scepter and invited the king and Haman to a banquet she had prepared. At the banquet, the king asked Esther what her request was, offering her up to half his kingdom. Esther, however, requested only that the king and Haman join her for another banquet the next day, where she would make her petition. Haman's downfall. That night, Haman left the banquet in high spirits, but his joy turned to rage when he saw Mordecai at the gate, still refusing to bow. At his wife's suggestion, Haman built a gallows 75 feet high, intending to have Mordecai hanged the next day. However, that same night, King Ahasuerus, unable to sleep, had the royal chronicles read to him. He was reminded of how Mordecai had saved his life by exposing the assassination plot, yet had never been rewarded. The king asked Haman, who had arrived early to request Mordecai's execution, how a man the king wished to honor should be treated. Thinking the king meant to honor him, Haman suggested lavish treatment: a royal robe, a horse ridden by the king, and a public parade. To Haman's shock, the king commanded him to bestow this honor on Mordecai. Humiliated, Haman led Mordecai through the streets of Susa, proclaiming his honor. Haman's hatred deepened, but there was no time to act, for he was soon summoned to Esther's second banquet. Esther's plea and Haman's fate. At the banquet, King Ahasuerus again asked Esther what her request was. This time she revealed her Jewish identity and begged the king to spare her life and the lives of her people. She exposed Haman's plot, revealing him as the enemy who sought to destroy her people. Enraged, the king stormed out into the palace garden. Haman, realizing his life was in danger, threw himself at Esther's feet, begging for mercy. When the king returned and saw Haman close to Esther, he interpreted it as an attack and ordered Haman to be executed on the very gallows he had built for Mordecai, the salvation of the Jews. Although Haman was dead, the king's decree against the Jews could not be revoked. However, at Esther's request, Ahasuerus issued a new decree, allowing the Jews to defend themselves against any attackers on the appointed day. When the day came, the Jews fought back and triumphed over their enemies. In Susa alone, 500 men were killed, including Haman's 10 sons. Across the empire, the Jews were victorious, and Mordecai was elevated to a position of great power, second only to the king. The Jews celebrated their deliverance, and the festival of Purim was established to commemorate their salvation and the reversal of their fortunes. The story of Esther is a testament to the courage of one woman who risked her life to save her people in the hand of the Almighty God, the Lord of Heaven's armies working through the events of history. Esther's bravery and Mordecai's faith turned the tide, ensuring the survival of the Jewish people.